Holly and Fiona stood at the Green Meadow Park gate, their hands locked tight onto the straps of their packs. The afternoon sun hung low, dragging long, dark shadows across the pavement. Holly dug into her bag and pulled out a map, the paper crinkled and worn at the edges. She traced a jagged red line with her finger, then looked up at the trailhead. Fiona stood still, listening to the wind move through the branches overhead. Holly gestured forward, pointing toward the line of trees. They stepped onto the dirt path together. The sound of their boots crunching into dry leaves echoed through the quiet entry point. Every step felt deliberate, a rhythm set against the fading light. They adjusted their packs, felt the weight settle against their shoulders, and pushed past the initial line of oaks. The trail stretched ahead, narrow and winding. Holly kept her eyes on the ground, scanning for markers, while Fiona watched the canopy. The path ahead was clear, but the forest seemed to deepen the further they walked. They moved in sync, leaving the open gate behind, heading into the thick of the woods. The air grew cooler as they moved away from the road, the silence of the park closing in around them. The trail stretched forward for 5 minutes before it suddenly split. The path diverged into 2 distinct dirt lines, forcing them to stop. Holly stood at the junction, scanning the dense trees for any sign of a trail marker. She turned the map over, but the lines were smudged and offered no clarity. Fiona shifted her weight, listening to the forest. Ollie settled. Silence hung heavy in the air until a sharp, rhythmic sound cut through the stillness. A robin landed on a low, mossy branch just a few feet away. It chirped twice, tilted its head, and hopped down to the ground. The bird fluttered its wings and began to move toward the path, branching off to the left. It stopped, looked back at them, and gave another sharp chirp before hopping further down that specific trail. Fiona pointed to the bird. She nodded, signaling that they should follow the lead. The uncertainty vanished. They stepped onto the left path, picking up their pace as the robin took flight into the canopy above. The rhythm of their stride returned, faster now as they moved deeper into the woods with a renewed sense of direction. The trail leveled off as the sound of running water grew louder. They broke through a cluster of ferns and stepped onto a narrow wooden bridge. Below, the stream churned against moss-covered stones, creating a constant low roar that filled the space. Holly leaned over the wooden rail, her hands gripping the weathered grain. She pointed downward. 3 silver fish darted through the dark water, flashing as they turned toward the reeds. The movement was sharp and quick, a sudden burst of life in the cool current. Fiona stood beside her, watching the ripples spread until they hit the bank. She shifted her pack, reached inside, and pulled out a sandwich. She took a slow bite, letting the energy of the stop settle in. They did not speak, but the shared observation of the water held them in place. The peace of the meadow seemed to concentrate here, in the spray rising from the rocks and the steady flow of the stream. After a few minutes, Fiona gestured toward the horizon where the trees opened up. They finished their brief rest, stepped off the bridge, and turned their focus back to the winding path ahead, their pace steady and refreshed. The trail changed character the moment they left the bridge. The soft, flat dirt beneath their feet began to harden, then broke apart into jagged stone. The incline steepened abruptly, forcing them to adjust their stride. Holly reached the first rise, her boots scraping against loose shale that skittered down the slope. The path ahead no longer invited a casual walk. It demanded attention with every placement of a foot. They moved in silence, the rhythm of their breathing becoming the loudest sound in the thinning air. The trail to the Eagle Hill lookout narrowed until they were forced to walk in a single line. Branches reached out, brushing against their shoulders as the forest grew denser and the ground more unforgiving. Holly looked up, gauging the distance to the next shelf of rock. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts now. Fiona followed closely, her hands reaching out to steady herself against the rising wall of the embankment. The ease of the meadow was gone, replaced by the friction of stone against soles and the steady burn of muscles working against the grade. They pushed forward, eyes locked on the darkening path ahead, each step requiring more deliberate force than the last. The incline turned vicious. Sharp stones shifted under every step, turning the trail into a slide of loose debris. Fiona placed her weight on a jagged, protruding rock, but it gave way instantly. Her boot skidded outward, finding no purchase on the slick, dust-covered surface. She lurched, her body twisting as gravity took hold of her momentum. She reached out, fingers clawing at the air. Before she could drop, Holly lunged. Her hand clamped onto Fiona's arm, her boots digging deep into the dirt to serve as a counterweight. The force of the sudden stop jolted them both. Fiona's breath hitched, her eyes wide as she stared at the steep drop-off to her right. Holly held fast, pulling her inward until Fiona regained her balance and pressed her palms against the solid rock face. They froze, locked in place, the sound of the sliding pebbles finally fading into the silence of the woods. Holly did not let go until she was certain Fiona had her footing. They exchanged a single, sharp look, a silent acknowledgement of how quickly the ground could turn against them. Fiona took a deep, steadying breath, gripped a sturdy root, and pulled herself back onto the center of the trail. The danger passed, but the tension lingered as they began to move again, more cautious, step by careful step. The final 10 feet of Eagle Hill rose like a wall, stripped of the easy path they had followed before. The earth here was packed hard, punctuated only by thick, exposed roots that snaked through the soil. Holly reached up, her fingers wrapping around a gnarled oak root that dug deep into the side of the slope. She pulled, her boots finding a narrow niche in the dirt, and hoisted herself upward. The strain pulled at her shoulders and back, every muscle firing in unison to overcome the vertical pull of the slope. Fiona followed, her hands slapping against the dirt, searching for purchase. She caught a thick root near the top, her knuckles white as she squeezed. They climbed in a rhythm of gasps and grunts, the world shrinking down to the next handhold and the next foothold. Gravity resisted every inch of their progress. Holly kicked off a rock, her legs burning as she launched herself onto the final flat ledge. She reached down, grabbing Fiona by the wrists, and hauled her up the last stretch of the incline. They both tumbled onto the level ground at the summit, chests heaving, the air suddenly thinner and colder. The scramble was over. They lay for a moment, listening to the sound of their own hearts pounding against the quiet of the high air. Holly pushed herself to her feet, wiping grit from her palms. The wind hit them instantly, stronger here, whipping their hair back as they stepped to the very edge of the lookout. Below, the world opened up. The lake sat like a polished mirror, catching the deep blue of the sky and pulling it into the center of the valley. It was perfectly still. From this height, the forest canopy stretched out in every direction, a vast, unbroken sea of green that surged over the rolling hills. Holly stood motionless, her gaze tracking the shoreline where the trees met the water. Fiona moved beside her, her hands resting on the wooden guardrail, her breathing finally slowing to match the rhythm of the gusts. There was no sound of the city, no noise from the trail below, only the low rush of air against the rock. They looked out at the horizon, where the mountains blurred into the haze of the distance. It was the kind of view that made the burning in their legs and the struggle of the climb feel small. They stood side by side for a long time, watching the light shift across the water, the sheer scale of the landscape pulling all their attention toward the middle of the lake. The descent began with a single, reluctant step away from the edge. The trail, which had felt like a challenge on the way up, transformed into a relentless test of stability on the way down. Gravity tugged at their weight, forcing them to plant their heels deep into the dirt to keep from sliding. Holly took the lead, her knees absorbing the shock of every uneven step. A few minutes in, the adrenaline of the summit faded, replaced by a slow, creeping ache in their calves. They navigated the rocky incline with careful, measured movements, watching their footing as the gravel shifted and skittered beneath their boots. The path grew steeper. Each step required a deliberate shift of balance, their quads working to brake against the downward pull. Fiona winced as a sharp stone pressed through her soul, but she kept moving, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. They focused on the rhythm of their breathing, now heavier and more labored than before. The forest canopy seemed to rise up to meet them, the air growing warmer and denser with every foot of altitude they lost. By the time they reached the flatter terrain near the base, their legs were trembling with fatigue. They stopped for a brief moment, leaning against a sturdy oak to catch their breath, feeling the heavy toll of the climb in every muscle. They pushed off the oak tree, limbs heavy, and turned toward the final stretch of the path. But the trail did not open up as expected. a dense, tangled wall of bushes had grown over the narrow track, knitting branches and thorns into an impenetrable barricade. Holly stopped, staring at the obstruction. She reached out to push a branch aside, but the wood resisted, snapping back with a sharp recoil. She tried to step around it, but the brush extended deep into the surrounding trees. With a sigh of frustration, she dropped to her hands and knees. The ground was damp and smelled of decaying leaves. She crawled forward, trying to keep her weight centered, but a low-hanging limb caught her shoulder, pulling at the fabric of her gear. She twisted, trying to unhook herself, but the thorns held firm. She tugged harder, feeling the tension in the branch, and finally wrenched herself free. The effort left her breathless and annoyed, but as she shifted to regain her footing, her hand brushed against something buried in the dirt. It was cold, hard, and distinctly unnatural. She squinted through the shadows of the thicket, her fingers tracing the edge of a rusted metal box half hidden under the roots. Holly gripped the cold iron edges of the box and pulled it into the sliver of light filtering through the brush. The metal was pitted with orange oxidation, flaking away under her thumbs as she wiped off the caked-on soil. It felt heavy for its size. Fiona leaned in close, her shoulders brushing against the lower branches, watching as Holly searched for the seam. The latch was fused shut by age and grit. Holly braced the box against her thigh, pressing her thumb into the rusted hinge with everything she had. She pushed, adjusted her grip, and pushed again until the metal groaned. Suddenly, the mechanism yielded with a sharp metallic click. The lid swung back on a stiff hinge, releasing a faint scent of trapped air and dry earth. Inside, cradled by a tattered, damp logbook, sat a single plastic dinosaur with a chipped tail and a smooth, swirling glass marble. The sunlight hit the glass, casting a tiny, dancing beam onto the back of Holly's hand. They both froze. The exhaustion from the long climb vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp clarity of wonder. It was a fragment of someone else's life, perfectly preserved in the middle of the woods, waiting for them to find it. Fiona reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 vibrant foil-backed stickers. She smoothed them onto the interior wall of the rusted container, the adhesive catching firmly against the aged metal. She then reached for the marble, rolling the cool sphere between her fingers before tucking it into her own bag. It was a fair exchange, a piece of their hike left behind in return for a token to carry home. Holly shifted the logbook into the light. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with names and dates stretching back years. She found a blank space, pressed the book against her knee, and carefully scribbled their names and today's date. Her pen left a dark, permanent mark against the fading ink of those who came before. They stared at the entry for a moment, the weight of the connection settling between them. Holly placed the logbook back atop the plastic dinosaur, snapped the lid shut, and pushed the box deep into the hollow beneath the brush. She shoveled loose dirt and dry leaves over the spot with her heel, until the ground looked undisturbed, as if the secret had never been touched. The trail felt different now, marked by their presence, as they backed out of the thicket and stood upright, legs stiff but spirits light. The woods opened up, and the cooling air of late afternoon brushed against them as they stepped back onto the main park path. Above the tree line, the sun had begun its final descent, turning the sky into a soft, bruised violet. Holly stopped, pulling her watch from her wrist to check the time. The numbers flickered in the fading light. She nodded to herself and tucked the watch away. Beside her, Fiona knelt to brush the thick layer of trail dust from her knees, her movements slow and deliberate. They turned their backs on the tree line and began the steady trek toward the parking lot. Every step felt heavier than the first, their muscles tight from the day's climb, yet the rhythm of their walking was synchronized and calm. As they moved along the road, the low angle of the sun stretched their shadows out ahead of them, long, thin shapes that reached toward the horizon. The park grew quiet, the sounds of the day fading into the rustle of leaves and the crunch of gravel under their boots. They did not speak. They simply walked, their silhouettes merging with the lengthening shadows until they rounded the corner and disappeared, leaving the park to the coming night.